Hi, guys. Great to be here. Sorry for the delays, here with my great colleagues. We'll get this going really quickly because I know we're running a little past schedule. So I'm going to start with a lightning round with my colleagues here, starting with Marshall, Lewy of Wondery.
Martha, I think you might be muted.
Oh, goodness. It doesn't. That's still working?
Now we hear you.
Wow. Okay, guys. Here I am racing to introduce everyone. Thank you guys for letting us join you. We're so psyched that we're here with you today and with my colleagues, and we'll get this kicked off really quickly. I want to start first with kind of a lightning round from everyone about what's the one thing that really makes it or breaks it for you in a pitch. And Marshall, I'll start with you. We're going to go really quickly.
Sure. Hi, I'm Marshall Lewy. I'm the Chief Content Officer at Wondery and a member of the Audible Emerging Voices Advisory Panel. I think the number one for me is, why are you telling this story? Especially as we're looking at stories from news or history. Why is it? What is your personal connection, whether it's your own personal story or access to something very unique in that storytelling?
Right. Johanna Zorn, yes, formerly of Third Toe.
Yes, and currently consulting and also with the Emerging Voices Advisory Board, along with Marshall. I want to surprise something that is going to surprise, delight, scare, intrigue, something that I'm not expecting, either in terms of the story itself or the way the story is being told or the storyteller themselves. Something unpredictable.
And Emily? Emily's an executive producer with me on my staff here at Audible.
Yeah, I agree with Marshall. For me, it's the why now. Why should I care? And why audio? I think that's something that people often forget to address. And so we're really looking for originality.
Cool. Now I'm going to go in reverse and we're going to ask, what's the one thing you don't want to see in a pitch? And Emily, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I don't want to read a book. I think a lot of proposals are really long and super detailed. And, I really love it when a proposal is really streamlined and clear and is just a simple deck, with a clear log line or concept and maybe, an audio sample here and there. But I don't want to read a book.
Johanna, tossing to you.
I would say vagueness, that it's about, but I really want to know some specifics. By the time you get to the pitch, what is the specific story? Who are the specific characters? What are the specific stakes?
Right. And Marshall?
Yeah, along those lines, we tend to not want something that's thematic based, theme based. So if you say it's about, the wealth gap in America, and then every episode is going to be a different topic on that theme. Like, we want a story, or at least, those kinds of issues, just like in TV and film, are best approached often through a strong story that can emotionally grab the listener. So I think that's something I say. We don't want thematic based.
Great. Really good stuff. Johanna, I want to start with you in terms of organization. How important is that in terms of ideas when they're brought to you, either verbally or on paper?
Well, I really like
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Emily mentioned a deck, a great thing for both the pitcher and the pitchy. It through the pitch, it's organized, you've thought through the basics, the elevator pitch, the longer summary, the characters, the long arc, the why now. It's all there, and it just simplifies things and is straightforward and leaves a lot of that, that you're going to bring the whole story to the person who's listening to your pitch.
I think my one concern about
So what?
those sorts of pitches though, is that sometimes that they're all visual images and they don't
Mm,
necessarily get the details. So it's a lot of splash and flash
mm.
without substance. So that would be my cautionary note with those. Good
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
I like
go ahead.
walking through it with them so that it's not just me, so that I can follow up and ask those questions because that's a really good point. I agree.
Yeah. Marshall, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about audio versus audio production knowledge versus story knowledge. I mean, how much do you look for the audio production chops versus, or in addition to the story development? How do you evaluate that?
We've had we've worked with a lot of reporters who, Pulitzer Prize winning reporters who have never done audio before. And there's definitely a learning curve there. But, part of when we get into those um, relationships, we bring the audio expertise. And as long as someone is willing to know what they don't know, because I think there is still this, it's going away, but there's still this sense that like making a podcast is super easy, which is just not true. And it's always more, the people who come into it thinking that, and it always ends up being 10 times more work than they thought it was. But they usually appreciate that writing for audio, even if they've done terrestrial radio, being a podcast voice is different. All these things can be learned if you keep an open mind. So we're very open to working with people who don't come from an audio background. And the content team at Wondery is people from all over, from the doc world, from print journalism, some from audio journalism background, but we have a mix. My background's in film and TV. So we're open to it, but as long as you know what you don't, as long as you're willing to learn and understand the medium. My biggest red flag is if you're not a podcast listener. And we do get pitches from people who actually never really listened to a podcast. And that is my probably number one red flag.
Interesting. And are there keys or flags to you when people are saying, "Oh yeah, I'm an audio producer"? When do you see through that? Like, are there signals to you that they actually don't know what they're talking about on the production front?
Oh, I'd be curious what Emily and Johanna think of that. No, I mean, when somebody I just want to hear their work, right? If somebody has experience, I just want to hear what they've done and see how it lines up with either what they're pitching or what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. I know the proof is in the pudding, right? So Emily, obviously you've gotten a ton of pitches, and you have, I know, lots of tips for folks. What would be a key tip for especially young producers in how to make a pitch?
Yeah, I think do your homework. That might sound obvious, but I think, really do your research on the story. Ask yourself the important questions. Has this been covered? And how, and if so, then what are you adding to the story? I would say I would really recommend pre-interviewing your main sources. Call them up, record it. I think you really need to get a sense of what they sound like and how do they tell a story, and how open will they be with you, and I think that can really make or break a story, and it's great to just start recording as early as possible. And then I think once you've done that, I would say you want to try to write a short summary of the project or the story, and try to write it in a sentence, and then try it out on your friends, right? So I think, or call your mom and say, hey, like, this is what I'm working on, what do you think? And I think a lot of the times their reaction will help you figure out what's interesting about your story or what isn't interesting, and then help you refine it. So I think, really do your homework.
I think
Right.
that's a really good point. We talk a lot about the eyebrow test. That's how we put it. You can sort of see in people's faces sometimes when you pitch something, if it's landing or if people are like, huh, okay. And they're not that interested, then that's a really good thing to really to develop an antenna for, because it can also be demoralizing when you're just starting out if you pitch and people aren't responsive. So you also have to be protective of your idea up to a point and then share it with the world.
That's a great,
Yeah,
those are both great. Yeah. Go for it, Emily.
I would just I would just add that people will be encouraging and nice. And I think, you have to kind of be aware of that. And just if I think the key is if they're asking follow up questions and they want to know more, and that's really when, okay, they want to listen to something like that, right? But if they're just like, oh, cool, like Marshall said, then maybe you need to do a little more work.
Great. So Johanna's been in this business probably longer than most of us, and she's a co-founder of the Third Coast Festival, which is an amazing podcast extravaganza. And I'm kind of curious, Johanna, because I don't think younger people, especially, may appreciate how long this art form's been around. And I'm curious how the pitch format may have changed, or what are the standards and how they've evolved. If you can sum that up quickly, I know it's not easy.
Well, we started the Third Coastal Audio Festival in 2000. And at the time, there was only really one outlet for most of this work, and it was public radio. And the people who decided whether a pitch would go through for an idea were the program directors there. So, and most of those folks were risk averse at the time because you're counting on people calling in with their pitches, so with their money. So, well, I don't think the basics of a good story has changed really from people sitting around the fire sharing their tales of the hunt. I do think that there's just so much more opportunity for so many more kinds of stories to be told, and more yeses than nos, thankfully, and so much more diversity of platforms and storytellers and stories. So um, it can get better. It can always get better, but I think this is a much better time than it was 20, years ago. But there was fabulous work then. A lot of that is on the Third Coast website, thirdcoastfestival.org. But I'm really excited about what's happening now. Really excited.
Great. Marshall, we've talked a little bit here about nonfiction pitches, but I know you field fiction pitches as well as Audible. We do both. And are there differences in the way people pitch you for those two genres, or is it kind of the same fundamentals?
I think they are pretty different. And I think the audio drama, again, like you said, it's something that's actually been around for a very long time, but there's a certain kind of boom and new attention happening now. And I think the rules around audio drama, I mean, the pitch process is, as far as the assets that you might present in a pitch, are pretty much the same. It could be I see a lot of very slick decks. One thing I want to mention is in both nonfiction and fiction audio, having an audio sample of some kind is really important, whether it's a short trailer that you've put together, or if it's a reported piece, even just some tape of your main subject, sort of edited to selects is just really valuable to hear something. And that's true audio fiction or nonfiction. I think more and more we are seeing audio pitches that have actors you've heard of attached. And so I think that bar is kind of getting raised. I think that's probably a big change. And to be honest, I'm not sure how important that is in your pitch. If you don't have that, I think it's totally fine if you don't have famous actors, as long as your actors are good actors. But I think that's something to be aware of, that it's getting more kind of professionalized, Hollywoodized very quickly on the fiction side.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we've discovered at Audible that sometimes the best actors on camera aren't always the best narrators in audio, and they actually need to be trained. And that's actually makes a nice segue to Emily, because Emily's dealt with a lot of hosts of varying levels of experience. And when you bring a host in who's maybe inexperienced, what are some of the lessons and tips you can share with our audience here about that?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of investigative journalists who are new to audio, and often they're bringing a story they're really passionate about that they've been working on for a really long time, and then they're narrating, as the host. And so I think for me, what's most important when I'm hearing a pitch or meeting a potential partner for the first time, I think is really just having a collaborative spirit. Um, the audio process is such a collaborative one, and it's a team effort. And so I think for me, if someone doesn't take feedback well at the pitch stage, that's a huge red flag. um, if I'm going to be working with someone for 6 to 8 months or even a year or more, sometimes I need to be able to um, raise concerns and work through challenges, and we have to be able to do it as a team. And so I think being able to take feedback and to trust one another, I think mutual trust is huge. So yeah, I think a collaborative spirit, and then just really a passion for the story. Um,
Yeah, and you've also talked about the fact that sometimes journalists think that because they've been on air in maybe a radio format that they know how to voice a podcast. Sometimes that can be very different, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the other thing about that is I think a lot of writers they sort of develop a writing persona that sounds very different from the way they actually speak. And that's something that I often have to tell people that they need to unlearn it, right? I think that just even the vocabulary you use when you write a book, it's not something you would say over coffee, right, with a friend. And so I think that's one thing that I really try to work with people on, is really trying to find their real voice, right? Their authentic voice. And I think that's really important when you are not only the reporter, but you're a part of the story, and you're hosting. And I think your listeners need to be able to have a relationship with you as a host, and I think trust is really connected to that. So um, yeah, helping people to find their voice is a huge part of it.
Yeah,
And one more
and one
point
of
on
I
that.
think there's. Oh
Go
no,
for it,
sorry. Go
Marshall.
ahead.
Oh, I
I
was
was
just
just
going
going
to
to say I
ask.
think that's
You go.
Zoom.
You.
No, go. You go first, please.
I was going to say one of the, I know Emily also thinks about maybe is the involvement of the host in the actual creation of the story. Marshall, please speak to it as well. Emily, maybe take that last point.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a big part of our job as producers, is to help find the voice and the things that Emily is talking about. There's an authenticity, and then there's also it's unavoidable. You have a persona and you have a certain connection to the story. So we try to lean into that. So there's all the, issues around, you're right, like writing for your voice, writing conversationally. We were just talking about a project yesterday, internally, and we were talking about that famous line that Harrison Ford said to George Lucas in the original Star Wars, where he's like, "You can write this shit, George, but that doesn't mean that I can say it," And I think that happens a lot in podcasting too. It's like, say this in the way you would say it, but you're also developing a persona. So I know for the first episode of a lot of our investigative series, we're spending a lot of time, we're doing many versions to try to find what that person's connection is and what that person's role is going to be in the story as the host. It's one of the only sort of levers you have in audio. And then to the second point, one thing we have experimented more with, which again is not a new idea because they've been doing it in the UK for a long time, and Audible does it too. But the idea of kind of this presenter model. So like Bunga Bunga was a series that we did about Silvio Berlusconi that we did all the reporting, but then Whitney Cummings was the host. And so she brought her persona to a story that's all about sex and politics and sexism. And it was just really fun, to be honest, to work with someone like her. Or we did it with Taraji P. Henson on Jacked, which was all about the rise of New Jack Swing. And the story of that, and so having somebody like who really knows how to act like Taraji Henson, and then taking that reporting and folding it in, was a blast, and I think we really enjoyed that.
Cool. Johanna, I know you've worked with a ton of independents over the years and recently to bring their work into the fore. And what's sort of a common pitfall you see in pitching, and how do you remedy it? I mean, what's your advice frequently on a common theme that you see, or several themes?
Yeah, one theme that I've seen, a lot of that coming in, like to entries to the Third Coast competition of work that didn't quite make it, that had a lot going for it. But a common pitfall was forgetting about the audience. I think we're all kind of infatuated with our own lives and what we've been through, understandably. Every life is full of challenges and ups and downs. And but then how do you communicate that to an audience? How do you make them feel part of it? Whether it's an extraordinary life or something that's in some ways, ordinary, and that we can all connect to. But how do you go from it sort of being your diary, your journal, which is important, being something that there's a place for the audience to fit in and to enjoy it with you and to go through that ride with you. I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
Hmm. We have 2 minutes left. Anything I haven't covered on the pitch front that I should have that we can think about? What about resources? I mean, thinking about how big a project is, and what's sort of the best way to maybe come at that if you're thinking about pitching. If it's small, just because it's small, what do they have going for themselves that would overcome that, overcome money? Yeah.
I always recommend that people not go alone, that they find people to work with who are sounding boards. So maybe there are other independent producers, and they're some economy of scale. They're sharing ideas with one another. There's of course a lot of great listservs where you can bounce ideas off of and where you can get support, but find a way to be part of a community so that you're really not going it completely alone. Is my best advice. And if you are doing a podcast that you're so worried just going to be so lost in the shuffle, think about teaming up with, if not with an Audible or a Wondery, but with an institution. Like if you're, well, my brother of course does a podcast because everyone's brother does, and it's on woodworking. So I advise him, and line yourself up with, a woodworking school or organization that's going to be a bit of a megaphone for the work that you do and also be a conduit for getting people to interview, and just find ways to be part of a community and something larger. It's just too hard alone.
Amen. Well, I think we're out of time unless there are quick thoughts from either Emily or Marshall on that point. Good. Well, I thank all of you, Emily from my team at Audible, and Johanna, who's on the advisory board at Audible. Thanks, you guys. And I'll turn it back over to the On Air Fest people, and looking forward to the pitches coming up.